got a really good session for you. We had a great group this morning and a good discussion around the idea of boundaries. And Tamara's going to do really two good things for us tonight. I mean, understanding what boundaries are and kind of we understand what our own boundaries are as adults, and then thinking about those boundaries with our kids and how we help our kids then develop good boundaries, because it's a really important skill and something we need to be just thinking about, but you have to have a good sense of yourself first and kind of how you are with boundaries, first of all. So thanks for joining us. And Tamara, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Great, Michael, thank you so much. I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can get right to it. So thank you all for being here this evening. As Michael said, this is a really important topic, and the rationale behind putting this talk together was that boundaries are just critically important for establishing positive connections with others. And we are always using our boundaries. They are not fixed. They're always moving around in different contexts and the different people that we relate and connect with. And there are lots of different areas where we have boundaries. But with parent and children, with the parent-child relationship, I wanted us to focus on some very specific areas of boundaries. We're going to talk about our ego, or our egos, or what I refer to as our ego state. You'll hear me going back and forth between the two. We're going to talk about our emotions and our emotional responses to things, our energy level, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by energy, and then time and resources that we have. One of the things around time and resources that we tend to that's the boundary where we are most familiar with, right? It's the stuff that we're dealing with on the surface, and the things that we have available to us, but we don't always think about where our ego and our emotions and our energy levels are at and how all those things are playing together. And then we're going to get into talking a little bit about setting limits and the use of the word no. And I just mentioned that these areas that I'm focusing on in terms of boundaries for the parent-child relationship, that are really some of the most important areas. And that's why I hone in on these for this discussion. They really overlap. They're very interrelated. They affect one another. And an area where we may be struggling with the boundary in our ego state, it likely could be because of our heightened emotions around that, or our emotions get heightened because of our ego state response. Our energy level could be off in some way, and the way our energy is can impact our emotional state and vice versa. And then obviously anything around time and resources can impact all the others. So they don't stand alone. So as I pull these apart and talk about them this evening, where I'm not talking about them in a way where they're just isolated. No, whenever we're talking about them, I want you to always keep in mind as we're layering these in and I'm separating them, they're starting to overlap, and they're going to affect the other boundaries. Our children are not a direct extension of us. I say this over and over and over again, and it's so important that we grasp that and we recognize that they are their own person. They are not just directly linked to who we are. And that's really tricky, because you may have a child that you that you look at and you think, it is the carbon copy of you. Like, this child is exactly like me. And that can be really challenging, because we start to think of them as if they think the way we think, or they're going to respond the way we respond, because they're so much like us. And then the other dilemma that can occur is that having a child is very different than us, and somehow we are not connecting or relating to that, and we struggle with, how do we connect to a child that's very different, and they have very different boundaries than what we have. And so if we can start off in the space of just knowing that they're separate from us, they're their own person, and we're going to honor their autonomy. And we're going to talk about how we do that and still keep these very important boundaries that enriches our relationship with them and helps our overall family dynamic as we do that. We're going to start with the ego, because a lot of things that we're going to talk about comes back to our ego state. And I want us to get rid of the stigma that that somehow whenever we hear the word ego, we tend to think of arrogant, right? And that's, no, our ego state is just who we are. This is just our sense of ourself, right? It's just, this is our being. This is what is inside of us that holds our interests and our way that we like things and things that, how our personalities and how we want things to go. So think of anything self as being our ego state. And this requires, in order to have a good boundary for our ego state, we have to be self-aware. We have to really take a look at where we're at any given moment within any context of, what am I bringing to this? What part of myself is entering into this space? What am I sharing at this time in terms of who I am? And then a lot of this requires self-acceptance, accepting that just because we are a certain way, we may not have an influence, or we may not, this may be a boundary for us. This may be where our sense of self is starting to cross into someone else's. Because the dynamic of boundaries is others over self and self over others. And they're always crossing. We're always crossing each other's boundaries, and boundaries cross in good ways and bad ways and in neutral ways, but they're always crossing. And so accepting that, okay, I have a certain ego state in this space, and this is what I'm bringing to it. And what do I need to be aware of with that? And then having self-compassion, because there are going to be a lot of times where we need to be kind to ourselves and recognize that, no, this is just what I'm meeting. This is okay for me to have this boundary. This is important for me. And it's good for my child, even, that I set this boundary. Then I'm making a clear boundary between, where I stop and their beginning. And then having self-control. With all of that, though, emotional regulation, the executive function skill of emotional regulation, is going to be a great moderator for all of these things. And so that skill of regulating emotions is going to be very important for keeping our egos in check, because typically when our ego state, we're having a hard time with that, and we're finding ourselves defensive, or we're struggling for, like, well, don't you get it? That you should get this because this is the way I see it. And we start to get into that space, our emotions will tend to heighten. And so emotional regulation will help us keep a clarity and being able to be more self-aware, self-accepting, self-compassionate, and then keeping our self-control. To help with this boundary, we can ask, is this about me or my child? I think that's one of the most important places to start, especially when we're thinking about a boundary around ego. Who is this really about? And is this a space where I'm making this more about me and what I think an accomplishment should be, or am I concerned about what others are thinking about us? And so I'm being caught up in that because I'm worried about my own self-image as a parent, or am I really thinking about what my child is needing here in terms of this? And it might be that it's your child's ego state that is crossing into the space. A good question, but again, we can't control our children's boundaries. We teach them boundaries. We help them understand their boundaries, and boundaries can be taught. And by us regulating our boundaries and modeling that for them, we're helping them shape their boundaries around that. So, and a good question to ask is, how and why am I affected? Because if, like I said, if we're in a place of being defensive, let's say, what is going on? How is this affecting me? Why am I being affected? Why am I feeling defensive right now? And then to ask, what does this mean to me? Why does this matter? What does this matter? What's happening with this? And if it's because maybe an emotional place of being embarrassed has entered into our ego state, and boundaries that are interconnected there, then we can stop and ask, okay, wait, what do I really want here? Who do I want to be as a parent in this moment? Do I want to be a parent who is functioning from a heightened ego place, that I'm becoming kind of self-absorbed in my own sense of self? Or do I want to be a parent who can take a step back and recognize this boundary and be able to regulate that so that I can enter the space and be more effective with a positive connection with my child. The emotions, that emotional boundary space is really powerful. We know how powerful emotions can be, which is why we talk so much about the importance of developing a good executive function skill of emotional regulations. We focus on it a lot here at Cliff Valley, and we encourage parents to focus on it as well, and to spend a lot of time on your own understanding of what you do with your own emotions. And some people are more sensitive than others, and maybe you are, and maybe you're one of those people, and to be self-aware around that and go, ooh, I do tend to be a little bit more emotional, and maybe it's important for me to recognize that my boundary might be a little bit more sensitive for that. And what do I need to do to support myself in that? And can I adjust that in some way, or develop some other skills in some way so that I am strengthening that boundary a little bit more? We know that our emotions affect our children. They just do. And as much as sometimes we will say, well, I'm drawing a line and I don't, I'm not putting this on my child, they pick up on it. So if we're not regulating our emotions and we're walking around at a heightened state of emotions, and they'll become aware of that. They will, I would say we're the barometer in our homes, right? They sense it, they know it. When we are close to people, as much as we think that we might be walling ourselves off away from it, and I'm not showing my child any of these things, when we are connected to people and bonded with them, we sense their emotional state. It's just what we do when we have attachment. And so it's important to realize that, okay, I have this heightened emotion, or I'm experiencing these things emotionally, and I need to manage them independently with other adults. And that doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge with our children, because I think it's better to, even if rather than walling ourselves off and thinking that we are protecting our children from some negative emotional experience that we might be having, sometimes it's just good to acknowledge that, yeah, mom is feeling a little sad right now, or yes, I'm angry about something, and I'm going to work through that. And, it's just something you may be picking up on that. And also too, our energy gets affected. Our energy can be up and, around that. And you could say, but this is something that I'm going to work through, and I'm going to take care of that. And, I appreciate that you might notice that, or that and I can see that you might be even concerned. And it's like, but you know what, mom's got this, and I'm going to take care of that. Know where you're at in the cycle of escalation, because I think this is another thing. This is where our ego state can cross in a negative way into our emotional state, because we can tend to let our pride get in the way of where somehow we'll be saying, I'm not that way, I'm perfectly fine, I'm not triggered by that, or I don't have a negative response to that, when we are. And somehow we won't be very self-accepting around that, and because of that, we can actually throw off our boundaries around taking care of ourselves with this. And so recognizing that you walk in the door, and I do use the word trigger, and I say all the time that, I get that that's kind of a popular word right now, especially in social media, but in my world, where I come from, after being in this world for a very long time, trigger was something that is an important term for understanding when when our autonomic state is being set off. And so when we are starting, when our emotional brain is getting engaged, then we have that, and we're already agitated, and we have that energy going in, we can recognize that it won't take much for someone to cross a boundary to accelerate us, right? And our children might not be doing a whole lot in order to cross that boundary to accelerate us. So again, this is important to be aware of where we're at, so that we can take care of our own space, but then also model it for our children of what we're needing. To help with this boundary, always ask, how am I feeling and at what level? be honest of where you're at in terms of the cycle of escalation. Because if you need to, you might need to think, okay, am I being reactive or responsive? What do I need right now? Do I need to calm my emotions down and really get this back within the space or the boundary that is comfortable for me and my child, so that we can move forward in a healthy space or in a constructive space as a family? And do I need to take that time to do that? Do I need to step away? Do I need to create it? Because that's another boundary. I'm going to step away. I'm going to pull it back so that I can take the time that I need to get my emotions in a better spot. So then I can then move that boundary back out and be with you again, so that we can have a positive interaction, or even just be able to be responsive. Maybe it's an issue that you're needing to address with your child and you're heightened about it. And so, okay, I'm going to step away. I'm going to take care of this so that I'm keeping my boundaries within check, so that I can engage my child in a constructive way so that we can deal with this issue. I mentioned before, energy is having the capacity to do. This is what I mean by energy. This isn't some kind of like, ooh, the energy around me. No, this is just our actual ability, the capacity of what we can do in the moment. Let's look at it as how much gas do I have in the tank, right? So this is just what we have available to us. And this varies. This can be, some days we have more than others. Some days we may have more than what we need. But we have to recognize that our energy and our boundaries around our energy can really be impactful around the people that are around us and that are interacting with us. We might have times where our energy is really low. And that's when we're just spent and we are worn out, and our kids are wanting more from us, or our partners or our spouses are needing more from us. And we just don't have it. And we need to take time to recharge. And a lot of that comes with getting enough sleep, or managing our stress, or just taking the time to say, whoa, hold on a minute. If I keep going and going without pausing in between, I'm going to get exhausted. And when I get exhausted and low, it's going to affect all these other areas. And I won't be my best self in this space. We can also have energy that is too high. And this is where this is really interesting. And this is where the I stop and they begin can really play out in a very stressful way. I've seen conflict happen in families a lot around a parent being very excited for their child getting ready to do something, and the child is like in a different emotional space or having different energy. Maybe their energy is more subdued because they're apprehensive about what they're about ready to do, and the parent's all in. You got this, let's go, and they're all fired up for it. And the kid is like, oh man, you're too much. I need you to slow down. I need you to stop. And then what happens is when we get that feedback, then the boundary crosses into our ego space. And then I hear the defensiveness of the parents. It's like, I'm just trying to support you. And the kids are like, well, all right, but calm down. Right. So, and it happens. I mean, we get excited for our kids, but we have to know, the difference between what we are handling in that moment and what our child can handle. And that maybe our energy isn't matching the others in that space. And then in this, could it be sending the wrong message? Because I go back to this space of your child maybe apprehensive to, let's say, take the stage, and you're all in and you're excited and you're not afraid to take the stage. You're all about performing, and your child's apprehensive. And we start to say to them things like, this is no big deal, and you got this, and this is how you do it. Just get up there and just be bold, and so and so's done it. Look what so and so did. Your friend or this friend. And what's interesting around that is that when it's crossing the boundary into our child's minds, is that children can start to think that what is wrong with me that I'm not that excited? What's wrong with me that I don't have that? And, and we are, we're accidentally, let's say, or inadvertently, we're harming them, and we don't want to do that, obviously. So it's really important that we think about our energy level. I gave an example this morning around, this was something for me as a child. My family loved amusement parks, and they loved roller coasters, and they liked going and doing those things. And I was a kid that viscerally did not enjoy that. I did not have the same reaction to it. And the message was, what's wrong with you that you don't like this? You should like this. The rest of us like this. How come you don't like this? And it was just this whole thing around, and in my mind, something was really wrong with me that I didn't like it. But there was no way. They quickly learned not to force me on rides like that just because of what they got when they did it. So talk about losing your grip on boundaries. Put me on a roller coaster and you'll see it. So I think that it's really important to think about that in terms of our energy level and the messaging that goes along with that to our children when whatever energy we're bringing. So we can ask this: do I have the energy that's expected of me when it's low? And would it be best for me to rest? Would it be best for me to not engage in that? Would it be best for me to step back and pause? Am I committed to getting enough sleep? And if I'm not, this is something where I need to adjust this because it is affecting my boundaries and what's happening with how I'm interacting with the people that I love and care about. When my energy is too high, I can ask, is my child as excited as I am? Are they having the same heightened emotional state? Why am I excited? Am I excited for me and my experience in this? Or am I remembering that my child is the one doing this? Am I remembering that this is my child's time to play the sport or play the game or to perform on stage? And I've had my time. And is this more about them? Is this a moment where I'm looking at them as a direct extension of me, or am I looking at them as their own person? And that gets into that is excitement about me or my child. Time and resources. I mentioned in the beginning that this is probably one of the easier ones to kind of wrap our brain around because we're the schedulers and we're the vendors. We set the calendar and we provide the goods. And we are also the ones, though, that need to set the expectations and set the limits. And this is where it gets confusing a little bit because somehow we can get into a space where our kids are the ones that are being the ones saying this, nope, this is what needs to happen at this time, or these are the things I need to have in order to be happy and healthy. And you're then kind of thrown off your game thinking, wait, I've kind of had a limit around a cell phone at a certain age, and we weren't going to do that. But boy, I'm starting to get some convincing that this is what I need to do. And I need to kind of move that boundary around. Now, it's different when you have a 7th or 8th grader that's saying it's time for me to have that than it is with a 2nd grader that's saying it's time for me to have that. And so again, we have to think about where are those healthiest boundaries around these type of things, around our resources and our time, and what can we truly provide around that? And what is going to be the best plan for your family for that? With this comes modeling good time management and being resourceful. Again, very important executive function skills around having that time management and thinking it through and planning for things. What are our resources that are there, and how can we problem solve and make this work? And is it the right time to do that? Or are we going to go ahead and draw a line here and say, this isn't right for our family, and this is where we're going to be with that for right now. These are the resources that we have, and this is what's going to work for us. And as parents, we have the fully formed brain and the life experience to be the one that's really in charge of that. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping a good boundary around this, and that our kids don't become the ones who dictate this for us. Or we end up, I've said it many times, we end up becoming the concierge of their lives. And that will throw everything off, because now the child's in charge of everything that you're doing, and not that the parents are really truly in charge. And I mentioned before, kind of even this morning, around when a child is in the center of what's going, and the family is shifting into that child's space, then you're losing focus for who really needs to be running the show. And we don't really, I mean, there's a reason why 7-year-olds shouldn't be running the show, right? We need to make sure that we are keeping a hold of these things. And we'll get into setting limits, because we're going to talk about how those limits will move around. And we want to talk about being more thoughtful with the use of the word no. So setting limits. Limits are where we draw the line, and we draw a lot of lines, and the lines will move around. We may draw the line in the sand, and the next day the line is going to be different. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not going to be consistent with some things. This means we're going to be thoughtful about where the line needs to be. And we draw lines for ourselves. We draw lines for our children. We draw lines with our spouses and partners, and we draw lines with other people. And so we also need to recognize that, just really kind of being very clear, where are my lines at right now? And do I need to shift it? Does it need to be a line that can be moved further out, or does it need to be closer in? And that's going to vary depending on where we're at with all of those other boundaries I was talking about. And so where are the lines? What makes the most sense with our children? Going back to, our children aren't ready to be in charge. And so what makes the most sense? And that's going to be different depending on the developmental age for your child. The setting limits for your 6th grader is going to be different than setting limits for your preschooler. And so when parents decide this is the limit in our house, and you're not thinking about what makes the most sense for different children, that's when it can get really tricky, right? Because the autonomy then isn't fully being respected, let's say, maybe for the older child, because the limits being drawn more to be more appropriate for the younger child. And so again, we have to, it's tricky. So we have to really give thought to it to see where is our best place where we're going to be setting some of these lines and these limits. With our partners or our spouses, we need to make it clear, what do we need and what do they need? And this should not be assumed. We cannot read minds, and we back away from jumping to conclusions. This is a conversation. This is a constant check-in of where are we at, what do we need, how can we support each other? And it's really important, because as our lives get busy and our children grow in age, these kind of things, these boundary issues can start to really strain the marriage. And we want to make sure our relationships are being nurtured and cared for. And if we can look at it through this boundary space, rather than through a labeling or a blaming or an accusatory space, then we're actually going to be nurturing that relationship and really taking care of one another. And again, going back to that, these are critically important for positive connections. And then with others, what do we want? What do we want from people? What do we want to have experiencing with them? And what limits do we need to set around that? Maybe I don't want your advice right now, so I'm going to set a limit around that. Maybe I don't want your help with this. I appreciate it, mom or dad, grandparents, and I want to help out with that. I appreciate it, but that's not what I'm wanting right now. So setting limits around that with other people is going to be really important. And if you do want something, you need to ask, right? We need to say, you know what? I'm wanting more help from other people. I'm going to speak up and I'm going to ask for that. And I'm going to say, you know what, I could really use your help with this, or I could really use your advice with this. And then they might have a boundary around that and say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable giving it to you. Right. And so then we have to, and then that's our turn to recognize that someone else has set a boundary, and then we can accept that. The use of the word no, use it when you mean it. Use it when you mean it. we can tend to fall into patterns where we're saying no a little too frequently. And then it's kind of like we say no a lot and then we back off of it. And then our children learn that no really means maybe. And we don't want that. We want no to really mean no. We want no to be used for important things. And when we are managing those boundaries around our ego state and our emotions and our time and resources and our energy, then we can be more responsive and not just, be reactive to what we're doing. So we can reflect on, what can I say here? Is this a time for me to say no? Is this a time for me to really recognize that this is something that I'm going to stick with at this time? And it makes sense. I have enough information. I have enough. I understand everything that's going on and the context in which I've been given the information, and I'm still at a place of no, and that's what we're going to say. And my spouse or partner is on board with that as well. Because that's also important, right? Because we want to make sure that we have taken the time, that both people have had enough time to have the same information, and that we've talked it out. And this is where we're at. This is a no. This is a no. And it could be something around a sleepover on a weekend. Like, I mean, it could be that I haven't talked to Dad yet to find out what's happening. I can't answer that right now. And I'm gonna have to wait to get information from Dad. You talk to Dad. Dad starts to remind everybody that, well, wait, this is the thing we have going on in the morning, the next morning. Not sure we're going to get enough sleep. There's a boundary around that. I think this time it's going to be a no, and we agree on that together. That's how that plays out. But it's also okay to wait to give an answer. I mentioned that just a second ago, because if we are taking the time to work through, are we going to say no or yes? We need to wait sometimes. And, waiting is an important life skill for children. Delayed gratification, let them know. And don't give it, well, maybe, just say, I can't decide yet. Because given a lot of maybes, kids know a maybe can turn into a yes if they badger you enough. And what we want to say is, I'm going to wait on this. We don't have enough information, and we're waiting until we get more information. And if they bring it up again, you can say, we've decided to wait, and you asking me again is not going to help us decide. I'll let you know when I have enough information, and then I'll get back with you around that. That's teaching them to wait. That's teaching them to say, okay, I've asked for it. I got to wait on this. And again, you might change your mind with more information, which is why you don't want to land on that solid no right away. You want to give yourself time. Now, if you do say no, and that happens, and you get more information, circle back, especially with older kids. This is really important, and say, you know what? I know I said no to you, but I appreciate that I've been able to get more information, and you did it, especially if they did it in a respectful way. You really want to acknowledge that, you took the time, you gave me more information. I understand this a little bit better now. And, Dad and I, or Mom and I, are on the same page. And now I think we can probably do this a little differently, or we can modify it in some way, so that you're adjusting to what they've asked for. Some final thoughts, some additional thoughts around this. Children of all ages need clear boundaries. They do. They need clear boundaries. And it's going to look different, right? With ages. I've mentioned that before. As kids get older, we allow them to have more independence, but there's still limits there. There's still boundaries with that. And there are still expectations, and we are the ones that are setting those. And it's going to be important that we are even bringing boundary language in, so that they can understand this, that this is where a line is at, and this is why it's important. We can still honor autonomy with a developmental lens. 3-year-olds are independent. My goodness, remember the 3-year-olds. It's like they are all about, I can do it myself. Let me do it. And there's a way to honor that autonomy without losing control of the space. You can offer choices to them. Look at spaces where it makes sense for them to be making their own decisions around that and giving them the space to do it. Older kids, it's the same way. Look for where it makes sense. Remember, it's always about, through a developmental lens, does it make sense? And is this about them? I'm going to respect that this is their space. This is how they're experiencing it. And I'm going to step back because this isn't about me. And I'm going to honor their autonomy there. Our boundaries are going to shift as our children grow and mature. They're going to change. Our own boundaries as parents are going to shift and change as our relationship with our children grows and matures. So here are some discussion questions, and we wanted to bring this back. And I think that from this morning, it was a great discussion, and I hope that we can have the same thing. But these are some thoughts, just kind of look through these questions and see initially kind of what are some things that are coming to mind, and we'll bring it back together.
Tamara, thank you. As we're looking at those questions, maybe you could start off by just giving us a couple of like classic examples you've seen of boundary issues with parents and kids. What are some of the traps that parents fall into?
You know, I mentioned kind of the one already a little bit, but I'll expand on it. It's really in that ego space that can be really challenging. And because we can really want something for our children in a way where it also feels good to us in our ego state. And that's normal, right? Of course it does. We're proud of our children. I don't want to minimize that fact because it's very true. But when we get caught up in my child isn't playing well on the field and I can't handle that, and I'm now, I'm embarrassed, or I'm dysregulated in some way because my kid's not doing well, and so now I'm going to put myself into that space. Maybe I start to yell at the refs, or I start to get involved more, or I somehow think that my added energy to the game from the sidelines is going to make my kid do better. And that's definitely a space where it can be really very challenging for parents and cause conflict between you and your child. Same thing with performance in school. It could be the same thing, and it's just, we start to get worried even of what's happening, am I not, that crisis of competency that we've talked about before, am I doing something wrong for my child? And then we double down on the pressure to try and get them to a place where we think they need to be.
Yeah, that's great. The one I see too, or have seen a lot, is parents who struggle with setting limits and saying no because they're concerned about what their child is going to think of them. Like, oh, my kid might be upset with me, or I don't want to disappoint my child, so maybe I shouldn't do that. And that feels like one where you're not, a parent needs to be a little more confident about being comfortable with their kid being disappointed, or comfortable with their kid not liking the decision that they're making.
Absolutely. And that falls into that category too, Michael, of am I a friend or am I a parent? And because when we're trying to be their best buddy, or or we're best friends, we're besties, and we really blur that boundary between parent child when that happens. And also that goes back to our ego state. Is it, am I needing something from my child that makes me feel secure and loved, when really my child is needing me to be more of an authority for them, and to be the one, and they need that from us, Michael, because if we don't set that boundary, it creates a lot of insecurity in children, because they need the adults in their lives to be in charge. They just do.
Yeah, those are great. Thank you. Anybody have anything based on these questions, or just any other thoughts to share?
Hey, Tamara. Oh, sorry.
No, you go first. Go ahead.
All right, George.
No, you go. Okay. Tamara, I was just going to say thank you. This has been really helpful. And the two things you just mentioned, I think I personally struggle with. The first one being, like, you don't want your kids to hate you, right? And so it's like you struggle this boundary between being a friend and authority figure. But I think it's helpful to hear you say, at this stage in their life, or at the stage of life where my kids are, they probably are looking for a little bit of an authority figure, and it's okay to assume that role because that's what's needed now. And there can be a transition, like you said, boundaries change over time. And so you don't have to feel bad about being more of that authority figure because they're looking for that.
They need it.
Yeah, and you know what, George, George, these aren't mutually exclusive things. Like you can be really clear, like I think about how we work with teachers at Cliff Valley. You can care about kids and be really connected to them and have a good relationship and be very clear about what is okay and what's not okay, and being able to make a decision and let somebody be disappointed about it, knowing that you feel like that's the right decision because you're the one in charge, but you still love them and you're still connected to them. So you can have a great relationship and be really clear and have good boundaries too.
Mm.
What was the other thing, George? I think you said there were two things.
Oh, the other one is the idea of you see that your kids are an extension of yourself. And that's really hard, right? It's hard to see your child perform, to compete, to just get a result and not feel like that's a reflection of yourself because you see yourself in your children. And I think that one's really hard. And I think even hearing your presentation, the first one, I can see how I could start actioning on that one. But the second one's hard. Like it just feels like that is such a part of being a parent, right? Is that your children's an extension of you. But I think you're right to recognizing that they are their own individual can only be good, and then they're not you. But I think that's very challenging for me and probably for a lot of people on the phone. Or if not, I'd love to hear how they do it.
No, I think
It is so hard. It really is. I mean, and we're going to have times where we're better than others, right? And that's where that self-compassion comes in with all of this, because every time that we can practice stepping back and letting them have the space for being their own person in this, where again, stepping back doesn't mean stepping away and being free range with it all. It just means recognizing that, oh, wait, this isn't about me. This is them. They're doing this for the first time. This is their game that they're playing in. I've played my games,
Yeah.
This is their time to play their games. I've been in school. It's their time to be in school. And it's just, and it doesn't mean that we're not still offering love and guidance and support. It's just more about how we're doing it. And what is our intention when we do it? Who are we doing it for? Are we doing it for us? Or are we doing it for them?
And I think my key to what I'm hearing, a good takeaway for me is just being aware that reaction's happening is very helpful. Like for instance, when the email about standardized tests came out today, I was like, yes, right. But that was just me and in my experience growing up, right? And being aware of that is helpful.
Yes. And that's a great example.
Yeah, let's bubble some things in.
Yeah, just that awareness is really important. Yeah. Thanks, George. Gretchen?
Yeah, Tamara, can you pull up that intensity slide with the calm, the trigger, the
Roller coaster?
that one? Yes. I guess I was gonna say, I feel like everything that you're kind of saying is, step back, like let, back away, take your moment, etc. But like on this little chart here, right? So like, what if let's just say, kind of example, right? I've ran everybody around, got them to their activities, doing this for that kid, and come home and everyone's sitting around watching TV and like dinner needs to be made. Like I want to say, like, if I'm necessarily in the wrong and they're in the right, but like when you're kind of approaching that peak, right? If you can kind of catch yourself at like the trigger stage, right? Or actually, what does it say? Or rather the agitation stage. And you can, instead of like pull back, but like lean in and communicate and say, hey, I'm about to hit peak. You don't want mom to hit peak. Mom doesn't want to hit peak. So, let's talk about these things that we're triggering and what can we all do to kind of, I guess, avoid,
Right. And you're absolutely right, because that's where their boundary is crossing yours, right? So they are at a low energy place. They're trying to get some rest and they're trying to chill out, and you still need something from them. And so what the pullback isn't in pullback away from you asserting, expressing a need. The pullback is take a second so that you can calm your emotional state, so you can be responsive in that way that you're saying, and say, hey, this is where our energy boundaries are crossing a little bit. And I need you. And this is the thing though, we have to be careful about, like saying to someone else, you're triggering me, rather than being, I am feeling this way.
Yeah.
Because that just because their boundary is crossing yours doesn't mean there's an intention in it. It just means that it's happening. And we just need to say, okay, wait, this is just a boundary thing. This is their energy's low, their energy's in a different place, my energy's in a different place. And the same thing can happen when our kids are extremely excited and hyper and we're in a low energy place and we need them to calm down, right? We
Sure.
need them
Yep.
to be in a different space. So it's not that they're doing it on purpose to trigger us. It's just that's what's happening. And so, if we look at it from a boundary place, think about how much more constructive we're going to be with that, because then
Sure.
there's no blame. There's no labeling of intention. It's just, this is just what's happening. And so okay, so this is what's happening. This is what I know is happening. And I need something from them at this time. And I'm going to take a second. I'm going to step back. I'm going to bring myself back. So I'm not in acceleration place because they're chilling out on the couch and I need them to get up and do something. I'm going to step back and get to a better, calmer place and just say to them, hey, let's all get together here, because my energy is really low and I need your help with this right now. That's setting an expectation around helping you with your energy boundary.
I mean, this is really similar to what George was saying a minute ago about just recognizing when that starts to happen to you. And so Gretchen,
Yeah.
you realize you're at agitation, and it's not about even like having other people know that. It's like what Tamara was saying. It's like recognizing that and stopping, so that when you interact with the kids, you're doing it from a place of like just more stability and not out of control.
Yeah.
Because that's when we get up to peak, then we're like, hey guys, I already told you, we kind of go off, and then we feel bad about that parenting later. And then when we've done this, like this escalation cycle, it's about catching yourself and knowing like, all right, I feel really irritated right now. I'm really agitated. I've been running around. People are sitting around. All right, I'm going to go. Oh my God, I'm going to go outside, just get a quick breath of air, and then come in and let everybody know kind of what needs to happen, but in a calm way of like, hey, everybody, here's what I need to have happen right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Michael, something I just thought of. It's funny because like you can get the exact same outcome, and you can get it from hitting the peak and losing your mind, and then everybody kind of feeling bad about that. Or
Right.
you can take that second and go back out and take and then get yourself together and then ask and get everybody moving. So it's like,
Totally.
It's totally a choice.
Well,
And
I mean,
it's
and
not an easy choice.
I think you're going to spend extra time on it. So like from my experience, I would want to spend the extra time on the front end. The back end extra time is apologizing to everybody for how I handled the situation.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and that's going to happen to all of us. Like you said, we've got to be forgiving. Sometimes we just don't have enough in us to catch ourselves, and we mishandle it, or we talk to kids in a way we don't really want to. But if we can catch it on the front end and be more responsive, then you are spending some time on the front end to do that, but it's just much more productive. That's the trick, I think, in all of this. You mentioned emotional regulation early on. Like that is the fundamental executive function skill for parenting. Your ability to recognize that your emotions might be kind of getting a little bit out of hand one way or another, and catching that and having some strategies that you use to kind of get it under control before you start to do something.
That something that I've learned about myself is I get very hangry, and my kids know that as well. And so when I start feeling that hanger and they're not cooperating with me, I just warn them, like, your mom is hangry, and they know at that point that they need to cooperate, and or at least that things might go wrong if we don't all cooperate towards the same goal. So that's one of my self-regulation issues that I've managed to identify. So
Well, what I
one
like,
of the triggers.
yeah,
for
what I
sure.
like what you're sharing there is sometimes we can come up with just a simple phrase with our children around something that we're needing. It could be, I need us to take a minute, and when we talk about what take a minute means, then that's something that we all agree on around. This is what we mean by that. This is, oh wait, there's being a limit that's being set or an expectation because mom is needing something right now. And when we can teach them that, we're teaching them how to respect a boundary. And it's just it's a useful strategy around that. And again, it's like, I'm going to take a second to take care of myself. I'm going to need you to pause that for right now, and then I'll come back to it. That I need to take care of myself in order to be effective.
Yeah. These are great. Gretchen, George, Heather, thank you. Anybody else have any questions or topics? Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining. Tamara, great job. This is also, just remind everybody, a work in progress. Like you will continue to work on this in your parenting as your kids grow. So, know that it's something that we're working on. It's a practice. And we'll be successful sometimes, and other times we might struggle with it. But Tamara, thank you. And any last thoughts, Tamara?
I was just going to say that I shared with the morning group that I would, as you think about these things, because some of these topics are like, as we start to process them and think about them, if you want to carry the conversation further with me, please reach out and do that.
Yeah.
I will have parents frequently not come in to talk with me about anything specific with their child, but just to talk about some of these topics more. And I really appreciate that. So if you want to have a deeper conversation with me about anything that we discuss, please do. Reach out. I enjoy it. I love it when parents stop in and take time to maybe share an article with me or something that they're reading and talk further about this. I just think it's great if we take that time to do that.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Tamara. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow at school.